Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. We are talking about creating a data protection training program for your staff. It's good to see you all here. In the shared folders, which you should see underneath your screen by the chat box, you will see a copy of today's slides, as well as the latest catalogue from us. You'll also get the slides emailed to you. Okay, so like I said, the plan today is to talk about training, something I'm incredibly passionate about. So the intention of the session is to talk about how to conduct a staff training needs analysis, how to deliver interactive, fun training sessions, and how do you go about building a culture of data protection best practice. So, a quick question for everybody. Has anyone conducted a staff training needs analysis in the past? Feel free to just type in the chat box yes or no. That would be great. Okay. For those of you who have said no, then hopefully what you'll get from today is a start for 10. Okay, awesome. So let's start off with a little bit about what the Information Commissioner says about training, and then we'll talk about the needs analysis. I'll then talk about what training can look like, and then the culture and comms element. So the on the ICO website, and for the ICO that those of you that don't know, it's the Information Commissioner's Office, states that the law doesn't actually say what staff training protection should include, which is not really helpful, or how often it should be provided. However, I want to draw your attention to the fact that it does say, but like any other mandatory training, it should be relevant to people's role and it should be refreshed regularly. So they do see data protection training as something that is mandatory. So very much like your health and safety training that you might conduct, it is a requirement. And regularly, well, I would say from a regularity perspective, you want to at least be thinking about once a year. But that's my interpretation of regular. So just to hone in again to explain why data protection is important. Most of you will have heard me in the past, or you would have experienced my data protection training, or you have certainly listened to previous webinars. It is about making sure that we are safeguarding confidentiality and privacy of people's personal data. And by people, we're talking about clients, customers, donors, fundraisers, users of our services, staff, volunteers, trustees, directors, and the list goes on. It will be data protection and cybersecurity will be a major issue for you. In the last 2 years, we have seen a significant increase in the rise of phishing emails. And there's the ongoing challenge of emails being sent to the wrong person. So typically, you will have data and cybersecurity will be a risk to your organization. And you do want to make sure that you can reduce that risk and the level of disruption that a breach or a cyber attack could cause you. So let's dig a little bit deeper into what I mean by a needs analysis. So the training needs analysis can be, you can create a very simple Excel spreadsheet. You can include on that list a list of all the staff that you have within your organization. So that's your starting point. Pull off the list from your HR system, speak to your HR team. The list may not be long. You might be a small organization, or you might be of significant size. So what you then want is, you've got the list of all the names. What you also then want is their role. So what are they? Are they a customer services representative? Are they someone that fundraises? Are they a fundraising manager? Are they an office manager, operations, data protection lead, IT? So what's their role within the organization? And what's the function? So, like I said, HR, IT, accounting, marketing, for example. So what you're now building is in your Excel spreadsheet is name, role, function, and to what extent does technology have a place to play with their role? So Do you use things like Slack, Microsoft Teams? Do you have Outlook? Are you using customer relationship management tools? What are the products that you are using that are technology based to be able to collect, store, or manipulate data? Obviously, don't forget paper records, because some of us still do collect paper records. So what we're building now is essentially a list of individuals. You'll have a role. And what I would also want to add is, not only do you have role and function, but do any of those staff particularly work with any of the sensitive data? Now, if you remember, sensitive information is race, it will be health related information, it will be anything like trade, union, it will be religious and philosophical beliefs, for example. So add a note, because those that work with more highly sensitive information or vulnerable individuals like children or the elderly will need to have more specific training. So what we've got is we've got our Excel spreadsheet. You might do it in Word, whatever the system is that you're using. And what you want to do is you want to create a baseline. So what you really want to look at is, have any of your team had any data protection training at all? So, what is the current level of knowledge of data protection in your organization? If you don't know, or you're uncertain, you might just want to start from a very clean slate, and that's not a problem. I have a number of clients who are fully aware that they haven't delivered any training for a while, and actually, rather than trying to determine the base level, they are going to roll out basic data protection training to all of their staff. So, what's your baseline? So we're building on our spreadsheet. So you might have, let's go, if you've got 10 people on your Excel spreadsheet, you might have an additional column now that says basic data protection cyber awareness training, and indicate that everyone on those 10 is a yes. But what does data and basic data protection awareness actually look like? What should you be including in that? And who should you include in that? So, of those 10 people, are any of those on maternity or paternity leave? Are any of those contractors, associates, agency staff? Are they in scope? Do you want them to receive data protection training when you roll it out? What about anyone that's on long-term sick and they're going to be returning to work? What's your intention of training them? So again, you might want to add an additional column to say, of those 10 staff, how many of those actually are in scope? What we're also wanting to identify is those that have or need a higher level of training because of the area within the business that they are working on. Now, obviously, from a data protection perspective, I'd be very much focused on the role that they have to play and the type of data that they are constantly working with. So if you think about your HR team, they will potentially have information about grievances, disciplinaries, health related information about staff, pregnancy or paternity details. They'll also have all of the right to work checks, for example. You'll have IT, who will have potentially system administration access to your system. So, whilst they might not process the data, they do have access to the vast amounts of data within your organization. So, what we want to be looking at is, your basic level of awareness. Who of those 10 people that we've identified that I've talked about need specialist training? So they're not just going to get the basic training, they're going to get a little bit of enhanced training, because we want to make sure that we've mitigated against any risks for those individuals. I've included operations because mainly operations and the teams I work with will have a fundamental role when it comes to data protection and cyber. And certainly a lot of office administrators will also be given this role of helping support teams with data protection administration. So we're now building on this. So we've got our list, we've got an idea of the types of training that we want to basic and advanced. But what are some of the areas that we might want to cover? And I'll be perfectly honest, there's a lot that you could cover. I would also want you to consider, and I've not added this as a slide, but consider people's attention spans. How much time are they actually going to be engaged with your content? Now, based on my experience, introductory data protection training, you are really looking at up to an hour maximum, because most people will start to switch off after that point in time. The more in-depth training, especially training that might be scenario based, you might want to allow for 2 hours, for example. So some of the things that you might want to discuss are data protection. So the ICO states that basic data protection should cover the fundamental principles, the 6 principles of the law. It should give you an overview of what individual rights are, and it should give you a bit of definitions about data controller and data processor. So the real basics are what you want to be covering in data protection. But let's not forget security. So what security training would you want to provide to your staff? Do they use mobile phones? Do they use lots of technology? Do you want to be talking about logins, password management? Do you want to be talking about antivirus software, for example? Do you want to be what to identify for a dodgy phishing email, for example? So is that something you want to be considering? You might want to do very short training on email. Bear in mind that most data breaches that occur are email related. Do you want to give some very simple email training to those that use email every day? What about password management? Bear in mind, the most popular password in all breaches year on, year out is 123456. What is your policies and procedures around passwords? What do you want to reinforce to your staff about password management? What about in terms of the more detailed roles that you might be delivering within your organization that might be determining new uses of data? So your marketing teams, are they identifying new ways to be able to curate data from public domain? Only this week, Clearview got fined at £7 million by the Information Commissioner because they were scraping data about us from public domain with no real justification to do so. So do you need to provide your teams with legitimate interest assessment training? What about people that are deciding new IT systems that are going to be implemented? Do you want them to be um, given the necessary information to be able to do a risk assessment, things such as a data protection impact assessment? So there's quite a range of training that you could be offering. So it's not just a one and done intro to data protection and that's it. Data protection training is done for the year. Think about role, function, the access that they have today to the systems that they are using, and then determine the different types of training that you really want to make sure you cover. Why is this important? Well, because if you're going to roll out training, you want to make sure that you have your learning objectives set out. So I'm going to talk to you about a methodology that you might want to consider. So what you really want to be at the very basic, budget is going to be a key defining point for everybody on this webinar or anyone that listens afterwards. So off the shelf e-learning courses are by far the most cost effective method of rolling out data protection, fundamental data protection training to all your staff. So do you want an off the shelf training package? Or is the organization that you work for very specific, has a very specific set of data that you're handling, a very specific way of working that actually for you, bespoke training is the way to go? So off the shelf is going to be cheaper than bespoke, but you need to make that decision. Which way are you going to go? Obviously, if you're going to go down the e-learn, you're going off the shelf package, it's likely to be delivered in an e-learning fashion, which means whilst it might be able to be white labeled with your logo and style and stuff, it will be delivered via a computer. Or are you wanting a more interactive classroom-based training? Classroom-based doesn't actually mean in an office. We could do something like today. So yesterday, I was delivering training to 20 different individuals across multiple different locations via this platform. So video, voice is still interactive, but again, how do you want the training to be delivered? If you want it in person, there's likely to be an additional cost to that. So bear in mind the budget that you might have for training. Now, if you are going to be using an external provider, there are some things that you really want to be looking out for. So you already know what your learning outcomes are, you know what your budget is. So what you now want to be looking at is the knowledge of the, and it shouldn't say section, it should say sector. So knowledge of your sector and the practical application of data protection legislation. Now, you might be able to go to their website, you might be able to look at blogs, you might be able to look at free webinars that they've done. You might even be able to have a conversation with somebody in their team to get a sense of who are the customers that they work with, how long have they been in this field, you know, to see whether or not actually they're a good fit for you and your organization. You will, if you're going to be going for bespoke training, you're going to have to give them some kind of insight of your policies and your procedures so they can tweak it appropriately. When I work with clients and they ask me to deliver training for them, I typically want a conversation with whoever's leading the training program or who's commissioning us to deliver it. And I really want a sense of, well, talk to me about the data you're processing, talk to me about your common concerns. What are the biggest risks that you face? Where are your policies? Who are the leads? So that that training, when it's being delivered, makes more sense to the people that are listening to it. What is their experience in data and cybersecurity? You might actually want to see if they've got testimonials from clients or customers. You might even want to seek referrals to say, I want to speak to someone that's previously used your service just so I can get a sense of how good your services actually are. And I always say to people, if you want a good idea about how we deliver training, why don't you listen to one of our webinars? We're going to be good for some people, we're not going to be a good fit for other people. So have a look, see what's on offer. You might even want to look at a provider that can offer you the whole range, because you might, depending on your budget, you might want to do basic e-learning training for all your staff, and the more specific targeted members of your team that want advanced training, you might want that to be a little bit more bespoke classroom based training. So this is the methodology in terms of identifying and selecting that training. Of course, you might decide that you don't want to outsource this at all. You are the best person to deliver the data protection training in your organization. You understand the business, you understand the data, you know the systems that are being used, and you want to design this content, which is fantastic. So if that's the case, what I would urge you to look at is, what are the lessons learned from any of the near misses that you might have had? So how often do emails go to the wrong people? How regularly are you subject to phishing emails? If so, what are the lessons that IT have shared with you, whether they be an internal or an external IT vendor? What are the examples of repeated errors that you know about? And you want to build that into the content. You want to make it as engaging as is humanly possible. And you may roll your eyes and be like, Kelly, how can you make data protection training engaging? You can, if you can bring a little bit of drama to the training and say, this has happened. What would you do in this situation? These are the lessons that we've learned. Or we've noticed this in the press. You know, the ICO website for companies that they find is a fantastic resource to be able to draw on some of that and say, this is an example. It could apply to us. This is how we data protection applies in that situation if it was us. I love scenarios. I think they are a fantastic way of engaging people with training. It means that you need to break people up into little kind of groups to be able to really work the scenario. But think about data breach training. Think about asking staff to think about what's the data they're processing, why are they processing it, how's it being shared. So come up with scenarios that are relevant to your organization and drop them in. It also helps you deliver the training a lot better if you've got some kind of real stories to draw upon. I love a good story. Who doesn't? And I'm sure we've all got stories that we can share when it comes to data and data protection, even if it's not us. I'm sure we've all had some experience of emails being sent to the wrong person and they, oops, sorry, we didn't mean to send that to you. What can you learn from that? So we have come up with our needs analysis. We know who needs to be trained. We've identified how we're going to deliver that training, whether it's going to be online, in person, classroom based. We have decided the types of training we're going to deliver in terms of the roles and the functions. But is that enough? And before, obviously, I talk about culture and communication. What's the view of everyone that's listening? Do you think once a year training is sufficient in terms of raising awareness of data protection in an organization? No, I absolutely agree. It's not enough. And sadly, it's to many, it is a tick box exercise. It's mandatory training. We've got to get it done. We've got to show that we've done it. But once people leave that training session, they're likely to forget it, pretty quickly and stuff. And absolutely, there's a fantastic statement in the chat box. You need to have regular reminders to be able to change habits. It doesn't happen overnight, and there are many ways in which you can really kind of try and engage staff with a very positive data protection message. So don't always think about the doom and the gloom and the kind of the negative stories in the press. There are fantastic ways in which you can deliver positive messages. So what we want to be thinking about is, okay, look at the year ahead. Look at, once you've delivered the training, what's the follow-up message going to be from that training? You might want to focus on the most important areas. You might want to remind people about password management, for example. There are ways you can do that. You might want to even ask staff what is really worrying them. You can do that through an anonymous survey. I've done it for a number of clients where we have, I work with a client and say, okay, what are your common concerns that you have when it comes to data protection? We'll send out a survey, but we'll also ask the question of the staff, what is your biggest concern? And that really helps us understand, is there a disconnect between the two, but also allows us to think about what we're going to focus on. So ask your staff what's worrying them, and let's focus on the most important areas. But repeat key messages. What's good email practice? What's good sharing of information? What could you create posters that are colorful? Could you create post-it notes, for example, that you can put around the offices? Can you create picture-based messaging that has maybe got one or two words, but it catches people's eye and it's in the line of sight? Could you come up with one-page little handouts that people could have by their desk? Could it be role specific? Make it visual, make it simple, make it visual. Think about the regularity of messages that you want to send out. If you've got IT systems, say for example, you've got Slack, you might want to have a Slack channel about data protection where you'll post latest news or key things for people to think about. You might have Teams, you might have Office 365 or even SharePoint. Have you considered creating a SharePoint data protection site where it can be a place where people can come to and access information? What about pop-ups? If one of your biggest challenges is email messages going to the wrong person, can your email system put up a pop-up that says, are you sure you want to send this email? Might be a deterrent. Obviously, it should be part of every induction program. But think about, don't just give a policy. How's that training going to be delivered? focus on a monthly theme. This month you might want to talk about learning from breaches. Next month you might want to talk about, like I said, password management. You might want to talk about retention of records, spring cleaning. So in February, you might want to focus on love of data, so accuracy of information. So think about how you can link in monthly themes with the type of data that you're collecting. How about team meetings? It doesn't have to be a massive agenda item, but could you add it 5 minutes? I want to talk about this this month. Do you have an organization-wide newsletter that you can push out? So think about messaging. And always be open to people coming to you with ideas. Do they have good suggestions about keeping data and messaging visual? So think about being proactive, because I live in a world where mostly people come to us because they're being reactive. But let's be proactive, because I honestly believe if you can be proactive and you've got a greater awareness of all the risks and all the practices and all the places that people can go to for support, you're going to reduce the risk. You're not going to eliminate it, because that's not possible, but you will reduce the risk. So that's me, that I've waffled on for 20, 25, 26 minutes about this. But I really now wanted to open it up to any questions about what I've discussed. So I've given you an idea of the needs analysis. I've given you an idea of what to consider when it comes to identifying training provision. And then in terms of building on that kind of content, any questions or comments for me? I always like a good Q&A. I can see some typing going on, so I'm going to let that happen. Obviously, if you don't want to share any questions here, you're more than welcome to contact me after today's session and ask me. There will be a recording of today's webinar that will be made available to you, likely to be within a few hours, not a few hours, a few days. So the ICO doesn't provide training materials. However, what I would say is that the NHS Digital has a real fantastic resource of key messages and stuff. And if you're interested, I can send you some hyperlinks to some of the really cool websites that give you some kind of materials, to give you some food for thought, if that's really kind of useful for you. There's a really good question that's just come up, actually, in terms of if you have policies and procedures that you need to have updated, should you do that first before you deliver training? And I would say absolutely. So my approach to this would be: map your data out first, know what you collect, why you collect it, how it's collected, and what systems. Once you've done that mapping exercise, update your policies and your procedures. And then once you've done both of those pieces, you'll then have a really good idea of systems, data, processes, and the type of training that you need to do for that. So training should be something that's done once you're confident that all your policies and your procedures are up to date. And I'd always encourage you to review your policies and procedures on a annual basis as well. I will send the links out, and for anyone that's listening to this webinar afterwards, they will be in the description, so of the free resources. Any other questions or comments that anyone has for me at this moment in time? I will let you type if there is, and then just give me a few seconds to give you some content about us. So you can download our latest catalogue with all the training that we offer, should you be interested. We do offer a best practice group, which every 6 months you're more than welcome to come to. It's no cost, it's free, and it's a learning experience. Learn from others about how they deliver training and policies and procedures. We have a range of resources via our website, our YouTube channel, our social media. I'll let you go. But I'm here if there are. If not, thank you very much. I hope you all have a very good rest of today. And